Hi friends, and welcome back to another video. So today I wanted to dive into my April and May wrap up. So these are all of the books that I've read in the months of April and May. Alright, so before I dive into the books that I read in each of these months, I wanted to share some statistics about my April and May reading. So first I wanted to mention that I had 9 books on my April TBR and 8 books on my May TBR. I definitely did not read that many books in the months of April and May, and this is partially due to the fact that I was off on vacation for 2 weeks at the end of April and at the start of May. I also had finals at the beginning of April, and a lot of other things have been going on in the month of May, so it's just been a very busy, chaotic 2 months. Then I wanted to mention that I read a total of 6 books across both months. I read 5 books in April and only 1 book in May, but like I mentioned, things have been very chaotic, so I'm not surprised and I'm not gonna beat myself up about it. I read a total of 2,471 pages, and the shortest book that I read was 128 pages. This was a poetry collection, and it is God Themselves by J. Nichelle. And then the longest book that I finished reading in the month of May is Go Tell the Bees That I'm Gone, and that is 902 pages. I'm not at all disappointed by these numbers because I did read through Go Tell the Bees That I'm Gone, and now I'm fully up to date with the Outlander series. This has been a big goal of mine for the year of 2025, and I'm so glad to be up to date. And also, I just want to say that these books are huge. Like, Go Tell the Bees That I'm Gone is over 900 pages, and it took me such a long time to read through it. They also have like Bible thin pages. All right, in terms of the genres of the books that I read this month, all of the books that I read in the months of April and May were adult books, and 5 of these were fiction and there was 1 nonfiction. So a majority was still fiction, which is pretty typical for me, and I did have a nonfiction, which was great. I'd like to read a little bit more nonfiction throughout the year as well. Within the fiction books, I had 2 historical fictions, and this is subdivided into 2 categories. One of these I would classify as like a classic or mythological historical fiction, and then the other one I would classify as fantastical realism, magical realism, all of that kind of vibe going on. And then additionally, I read 3 contemporary romances. 2 of these were sports romances, and one of them had an unplanned pregnancy. And then the other one that I read was just an unplanned pregnancy romance. Those 2 books were ones that I have been reading for such a long time that I found that I had unfinished in my ebook catalog, and I just was in the mood to pick them up and finish them at the beginning of April. I also read 1 nonfiction. It is an LGBTQ plus poetry collection. I finished 2 books from my 25 books to read in 2025 list, which was good, but I definitely wanted to have gotten to a few more, especially since we are now about halfway through the year, and I will definitely be making it more of a priority to read books from these lists and make them intentional in my TBRs going forward, or else I don't think I'm gonna finish the list of books. And I read my books through 3 different mediums this month. So I read 3 audiobooks. I also read 2 ebooks and 1 physical book, and the physical book was Bees, so that was super long, so I did read a lot of pages physically in these 2 months. Some of the moods of my reads across April and May were a little bit more lighthearted, which was very much needed after some of the dark tones of the books I read in March. So it was more lighthearted, flirtatious, romantic, just very sweet, but there were still some deeper topics being discussed in the books that I read, and I did appreciate just having some romances thrown in because I just needed a break from some of the more intense reads from March. Alright, so just to recap, I read a total of 6 books, and I read a total of 2,471 pages, which I think is pretty good, and a bulk of those came from Bees, but I'm so glad to have finished it. And now I'm going to proceed into the next section. I'm going to talk about each of the 6 books that I read in April and May and give you just some of my general thoughts. I may be a little bit more limited on some books versus others. Like, I know for Deep End, I'm not going to go into all my thoughts in this video, but I will be making its own separate dedicated review because I have a lot of thoughts to share on it. Alright, so time to get into the first book that I read in the month of April. The first book I finished was Awk-weird by Avery Flynn. This is a book that I've been reading for a number of years, and I did enjoy this, but it was just a little bit more lighthearted. There wasn't as much deep kind of processing going on in this book. So I will say that I liked it, but I just found myself being like bored and just kind of feeling like the book was going a little slowly for me at certain points. points. I think it's definitely at least like 100 pages too long, maybe 50 to 100 pages too long. I think that this could have just been like a quick 200 or 250 page book, maybe even a novella length, and I would have enjoyed that more, because I think that the relationship just had a bunch of random obstacles thrown in it to keep the main pair apart from each other, and I don't know, it just wasn't my absolute favorite. I did enjoy the hockey aspects to this book. I think I've learned that I do like hockey romances, and that's a new thing that I've discovered about myself in 2025. And I like that the two characters are so very different, but they do have a lot of similarities. They always say that opposites attract, but I would say that they are opposite seeming, but they're not really opposites. They have a lot of similar personality traits, even if they don't recognize it or know it immediately. And I think that that's a better basis for a longer lasting relationship. The surprise pregnancy just felt like a way of bringing these two characters together, because they were not going to get together again or ever see each other again otherwise. They operate in two very different worlds. So I did appreciate that it brought them together, but it just felt like a convenient plot device rather than being very intentionally used in the story. I also think that it was very adorable that she had her own flower shop. I don't think I've read any other books where the main character owns a flower shop, so I like that Tessa, our main female character, had that. And then our male main character was a hockey player, and I like that by the end he's ready to embrace more change and he's open to being more flexible, which is definitely something that he had to learn throughout the story. So I think it was a very nice read. It's definitely one that you can pick up if you want something lighthearted and you don't want to think too hard about the books that you're reading. It's the second book in the Ice Knights series, so keep that in mind, but I think these are like interconnected standalones rather than books that you have to read in order. I read it without having read the first book in the series, and I still enjoyed it, and I would recommend it, but it's not a top favorite, and I do think that there are better hockey romances. Specifically, I'm thinking of Unloved by Peyton Corinne. That one had a lot more emotional depth and packed a bigger punch than Awk-weird, just in my opinion, but maybe I'm being too harsh on this book because it comes on the heels of having recently read Unloved. The next book that I finished in the month of April was One Moment Please by Amy Dawes. This is a contemporary romance, and it's also surprise pregnancy, unplanned pregnancy trope. This one I think I liked even less than Awk-weird. Like, I flew through it. I definitely read this in like a day. I had started it years ago and then I just went back and refreshed myself, and the only reason why I really picked this back up is because I had started it such a long time ago, and honestly I just didn't like the male main character. I found him to be very dislikable, and that really detracted from the story for me. I really couldn't see what the female main character saw in this doctor, besides the fact that he had money and that he was a doctor. Like, I don't know, their relationship was very full of strife. I know that it's meant to be more enemies to lovers, but I just really couldn't find myself feeling connected to the male main character the same way that I was to the female main character. I thought that it was really cool that she has her degree in psychology, that she wants to work with children. I really love that aspect of the story, and that's why it has a higher rating and a higher view from me than it would have otherwise. But I felt like she just deserved better than this doctor guy who was treating her like absolute crap for, I think, about more than half of the story. And again, this was one that I think could be a little bit shorter. I don't think that this one dragged out as much as Awk-weird, because I felt like there was more conflict, and I mean true conflict, happening in this one that they had to overcome, whereas Awk-weird, it was just more of them resisting their feelings for each other. Again, this is just a very quick read. I think you can definitely check it out if that's what you're looking for, but it's not a top favorite of mine. I think that I read a lot of these books within this trope of like surprise pregnancy, unplanned pregnancy, as like just books where I can turn off my brain a little bit rather than looking for the next great well-written masterpiece in them. But I did enjoy the story. I just think that I've read other books that I've done this much better, and this is definitely not one that I would recommend if you're looking for the unplanned pregnancy or surprise pregnancy trope in a story. Then the next book that I read was actually a poetry collection, and this was also in the month of April, and this is God Themselves by Jane Shell. This is about this LGBTQ plus word poet who is kind of sharing a lot of her thoughts on her life growing up in the South as a queer Black woman, and the effects that being forced into religion had on her life, and just all of the dangers that come with being a woman living in the modern world. And I thought it was very moving. It was a very powerful poetry collection. I think that Jay had a lot of important things to say in this story, and I love that the book celebrates queerness, celebrates the LGBTQ plus community, and I'm glad to have read it in the month of April as it was National Poetry Month. I wish I could have gotten around to some more poetry collections this month, but it was just too chaotic about it, but I do think that this one has a lot of humor, a lot of insight into the story, and it is a good story to read to get more of her experiences. I think that it comes across well as an audiobook because she is a word poet, so she really enjoys that aspect of just talking, and that kind of presentation that she's able to give in the audiobook really enhances the experience, at least in my opinion. It's definitely one that I recommend that you check out, especially if you're interested in reading some more nonfiction poetry collections and LGBTQ plus collections as well. I like that it talks about religious trauma in this one, and I think that is one that you should definitely check out if you're interested. All right, so the next book that I read in the month of April was Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, and this one I don't want to go too deep into because I do plan on doing a fuller length review in another video, but it is one that I read because it was a highly anticipated read for a lot of people, and I've heard really great things about Ali Hazelwood's writing. It was one of my most anticipated releases of 2025, and sadly I just found myself feeling very disappointed by the story. I didn't feel connected to the characters. I didn't feel like their bond was really genuine. The story starts with our female main character Vandy and our male main character being introduced to each other, and them kind of like finding out about each other's sexual attractions and stuff, because Vandy's best friend Penelope was the ex-girlfriend of Lucas, and so she says that they should get together because they would be perfect for each other with their sexual tendencies and all of that, since they like some kinky things in the bedroom. However, I felt like their relationship just didn't develop beyond that point, or it didn't develop so much to me. I didn't feel like there was an emotional connection beyond just the sexual chemistry, and I just really thought that Vandy's best friend Penelope was a terrible person. She was a terrible character in this book, and I don't know, there were just so many frustrating things about this. Little things about it worked for me, but most of the big overarching plot of it just didn't work, and I'm sad to say that this was not a favorite. This is a least favorite, I think, so far of the books that I've read in 2025. It's ranked pretty low, but you can definitely give it a try as it does work for some people, and I am still looking forward to trying out some of Ali Hazelwood's other books and seeing how I feel about them, since her writing is so beloved, and I think there might be other stories that I might mesh with better. All right, and then the last book that I read in the month of April was The Life of Herod the Great by Zora Neale Hurston. This was published posthumously, so this was published after she died, and the manuscript of this novel was found in her papers when they were going through her things, and it does have an introduction by Deborah Plant, so it kind of gives you some insight into what Zora was doing at the time of writing this story and this biblical retelling. This one I counted as like a historical fiction, but also has some like mythological aspects to it, as it is a Bible retelling of the story of Herod the Great, and it reframes him so he isn't framed as like a villain, but rather seen through the context of a morally gray hero and kind of viewing things from his perspective. So it was really interesting. I thought that the format of the story was unique. I listened to the audiobook of this, and I think that added to my experience of it because there was like music in between each like chapter or section of the story, and it was like very action packed. There was always something going on with it, and there was a lot of battling and fighting in this because it is during the like ancient Roman times, and this all takes place in the area of like Palestine, Israel, that sort of area, and so it was really interesting to get to read about this from the perspective of like an ancient person. I liked how she tried to humanize him. Obviously he still had faults, but she tried to make him seem more human, more like just realistic traits rather than just being pure evil. This was an interesting one, even if you aren't big into religion or aren't big into reading the Bible or anything. It is really interesting from a mythological perspective. I really like this story. I think this was possibly my favorite read of April, and it is one that I recommend. I got the audiobook for this from Libro FM, so I just want to say a big thank you to them for providing this to me for free from their audiobook listening program, and I'm glad that I finally got around the chance to listen to this. I've read one other book by Zora so far. It is Their Eyes Are Watching God, and I really like that one, but I think I like this one even better. I just thought that the writing style and the language in this one was more relatable and easy to follow than Their Eyes Were Watching God. So if you're looking to try out something that Hurston's written, this could be a really good one to try out. All right, and then the last book that I read in the month of May, and this is one that I started in March actually, so I read it in March, April, and May, is Go Tell the Bees That I'm Gone. This is the 9th book in the Outlander series, and it is following the adventures of Claire, who is a World War II nurse who travels back into time by accident after she goes to Scotland on a second honeymoon with her first husband. And she travels back in time and she meets this Highlander named Jamie in the 1740s. 40s, and it's their story where they fall in love and all the adventures and craziness that happens from there. That is the premise for Outlander, the first book, and this is the 9th entry in the series. At this point, there's a lot of different perspectives happening, and there's a lot going on in the story. I think that it was really well written. I think that her lyrical writing style is very beautiful. However, it does get to be a little bit long-winded. This book was over 900 pages long, as you can see from here, and I did tab and annotate this because I do want to have the notes back when I read this, just to kind of go through, reread my notes, and see what I was thinking before the 10th book comes out, as she is currently writing the 10th and final book in the main Outlander series. I have enjoyed a lot of the books in this series, but my biggest critique or criticism of them is just how long and how long-winded Diana is. She always uses 20 words when 3 will do, and sometimes it can get really boring. This one had a lot of like medical detail, as they all do, and I'm just not the biggest fan of reading about all of Claire's medical background and stuff in it, but there is so much of the family together in this story, which I really loved. This has to be one of my favorite entries in the series. I would say Drums of Autumn, A Breath of Snow and Ashes, and Go Tell the Bees That I'm Gone are some of my absolute favorites. I'm still not sure which is going to be my top favorite of these 9. I'm gonna have to think about it and reconsider, but I did like that all of them are back together in a single timeline, so it's a lot less chaotic than Written in My Own Heart's Blood, which was the 8th book, and I liked just all of the relationship development that happens in the story. There is more progression with the American Revolutionary War as we are getting closer to the end of it. We're about 2 to 3 years off from the end of the war, and things are heating up with the Americans and the British fighting each other, and I liked all of the development that William has in this story, but I wish we would have gotten a little bit more about Lord John Grey in this story and what was going on with him, as I feel like that's left off on a big cliffhanger towards the end, which I also didn't love, but I get that it had to be dramatic and climactic in order to get readers engaged for the final installment. So I enjoyed the series overall. I would recommend it, but definitely you can skip some parts of it, and there are just some areas that make it a little difficult to get through, but I'm glad to have read the 9th book, and I can't wait for the 10th and final book to come out and be released. All right, so those are all the books that I read in the months of April and May. I'd love to know about your favorite book that you read in April or May, or any other books that you read that you just want to talk about. I would love to hear it in the comments down below, or if you just want to mention anything about any of these books or anything else, I'd love to hear it. And if you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe. Thank you so much for the support. I appreciate each and every one of you, and wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you for the next video. Bye!